Yesterday was also an amazing day. It's let Mila sit down and watch much of the president's speech last night because the implications of what this move means for millions of people is pretty stunning. I mean, I mentioned at the top of the show that yesterday. And I think I mentioned at the top of the show that yesterday we had on the program a woman who was one of the people whose application who applied and was granted essentially a stay of her deportation or a legal status or non-illegal status, I guess. Under the DREAM Act, under DACA.
Right.
And her father had been deported 6 or 7 years ago after living in this country for 19 years. Her mom has been in this country for 26 years. She worries every time she doesn't hear from her, for an hour on the phone that she's been, for some reason, deported. And her mom is going to get relief from this. I mean, it's just sort of stunning to contemplate. And it's been a fascinating debate. Yesterday, I had on the program a friend of mine who is a self-professed independent, gets most of his news from Ann Coulter, but be that as it may. And
so he's not what you'd call moderate independent.
Indeed. But for him, supposedly, he agrees with the policy. He just thought the timing was wrong. And, of course,
he does realize that Ann Coulter, as far as we know, is currently the undead, right?
Well, see, now that's the type of uncivility that is really ruining Washington, Cliff. And that's why nothing gets done, because people mock Ann Coulter. I mean, look, and so it was fascinating to watch last night the MSNBC coverage, the little CNN coverage that it got, the Fox coverage. They're going ballistic on Fox, but they don't know what to do. There is nothing for them to do about this. And we should remind people, nobody's gotten legal status. The only thing that has happened is we have 400,000 people who are deported annually. President Obama has sat upon the most rigid and, in my estimation, vindictive regime of deportation, just from a numbers standpoint, in history. 406,000, I think it was last year. There is only resources to do that. And there are 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country. This is basically just simply saying we are going to codify and rationalize the way that we deport people and who we go after to deport. And you people, you 5 million people, you are not on the list. You've got 3 years, and to which time, hopefully, we will have figured out some way to deal with this in a rational way through legislation. But until now, you're just deferred. And under deferral practices, you can get work permit, et cetera, et cetera. That's it.
Right. And yet still an enormous, as you pointed out, it's such an enormous deal for people who are worried every time they get that phone call or every time, a policeman's peering around the corner or, the have to live that life, I would say makes your life, I would guess would make your life, let's call it not only hellish, but a lot less productive. And just put you in the kinds of circumstances that are just, I consider to be inhumane. And I'm sorry, but there is a point where this argument becomes stale from the other side and becomes stupid. And frankly, considering how many Republicans in the Senate voted for a bill and how many in the past were for this, or for even more progressive bills than this is just another one of those cases of the goalposts moving, and you have to oppose it because the Democrat and the black guy are for it. Yes, there's a radical right wing in the Republican Party. We're all familiar with them. And they're crazy people, and they don't have answers to anything. But to me, the bigger problem are the ones that give in to all of them, that won't stand up for what's right because of them. And that's what's led nothing to happen. Because, again, it's that feedback loop. We always talk about the Rush Limbaughs and the Fox Newses and the people like that. They make money off of this. of sowing this kind of hatred. But for most rational people who look around and say, should we just ignore what's a major problem, whether it be people not having health care or undocumented workers here or whatever it might be, or should we take care and have come up with constructive, progressive, and fair answers to our problems? It doesn't mean that there's no punishment for misbehavior. It doesn't mean that there's no taxes to be paid. It doesn't mean there's no, that there isn't something like that, but it means you've got to come up with something, a policy to solve these problems. And the far right is not interested in that. They're just interested in hating. Whatever it is, just give them something to hate. There's nothing constructive coming from there. And that's what makes all this sort of that much more angering. But at least for right now, it should have been done a hell of a lot sooner. And, I want to give President Obama credit, and I will, for what he just did, but I can't, of course, not mention that this could have been done ages ago. And in my opinion, should have been done ages ago because he gave the Senate a chance. They acted. When the House refused to act, it should have been fine. You got 2 weeks to act or however long. And if you don't, I'm going to do it.
Right. And this is also not to mention the DREAM Act, which was brought up. It was actually passed by the House in 2010 and then filibustered in the Senate. I mean, so it's fascinating, though, to watch. Is it Mark McKinnon? Who's the guy? Steve Schmidt on MSNBC.
The bald one.
Who was just sort of outraged and really basically the same argument. It's like this sort of like weird process argument, this notion that now we have really foreclosed the opportunity for something to pass in the House and the Senate with the new Congress coming in, which is just absurd. If the House is not going to pass a Senate bill that has passed in the Senate with Republican support that calls for 700 miles of fence, that calls for 30,000 some odd more border guards, essentially, I guess, and that all of that must be done before any other action happens. If they're not going to pass that a year ago, they're not going to pass anything at any time ever. And I don't need to be a mind reader to look at that. I cannot tell you with 100% assuredness that if I drop a hammer on my toe, it's not going to float up in the air. But every experience I've ever had with gravity would show me that would tell me that the hammer is going to drop and land on my foot if I let go of it. And
that's the thing, and that's why when I bring up the ones that aren't the raving lunatics, Steve Schmidt's an example of a guy who clearly wasn't much of a fan of Sarah Palin after she was on the ticket because of how radical she is. He has a gay brother, and of course, like every Republican who has a gay family member, they're suddenly for gay marriage because they become liberal on things that help their family. But at least fought for that and raised money for it and stuff like that. But these are the ones I blame the most, to be honest with you. Because your David Vitters and Jim Inhofe and whatever are just horrible people who don't know any better. They're backwoods idiots who never should be in a body like the U.S. Senate. And if it was a reasonable body where where every state didn't get 2 people, even if you've got 3 people and a cow in your state, you didn't get 2 senators, then we wouldn't be stuck with a Jim Inhofe. But that's the way things work. And we get them. But to me, it's the ones who enable them, and Steve Schmidt is from that group because he's sitting here repeating these stupid talking points that are just a bunch of crap. I mean, if I were sitting there on MSNBC, I'd probably, like I was about 8 years ago when I got banned for a couple of years, I'd probably get banned for a couple more years for what I would say to him, because they'd just be like, are you an imbecile? Have you watched the same Congress that I've watched? Have you watched them refuse to act on this? Have you watched them take what was a Heritage Foundation health bill and turn it into communism and literally try to repeal it 50 times, and now they're going to try to repeal it again and block Medicaid and try to get rid of the medical device tax and just use everything in their power to go after what is in the end a very moderate bill? These people are not people who are trying to constructively do anything. So don't feed me that shit. I mean, it gets tired. Oh, if we just waited a little bit longer. Okay, Steve. I'm sure they were saying that on Scarborough, good old Scarborough country. I think that's still the name of it, isn't it? I'm sure they were saying that too, which is Obama's being an autocrat. And, I mean, right. The sort of I'm a reasonable Republicans like Joe Scarborough and Steve Schmidt and Michael Steele, and some of the other ones like that. And you just want to be like, at what point do you walk away from your party because it's just effing nuts? You decide that, but don't BS me, and don't come out and tell me that this is a functioning organization anymore and not a frickin' cult, because you look for yourself. The evidence is right there.
Yeah, of course.